with the video that I do have, and so I don't mind. Okay, good. All right, we are recording here. Yeah, wild days. I was just on I was just on Twitter watching your video. Your
Oh,
your pole dancer.
like
Love
I'm
it.
super sleep deprived and my brain just went to a totally different place. So I just went for
Yeah.
it.
No, I love it. Sometimes that's what you got to do.
Yeah.
Well, great. So I will jump in just a moment. We'll kind of start at a point where I will have recorded an intro to you, and I'll just draw that from the bio and the assets that you sent to me. And I just want to ask you, I'll ask you a little bit about what your childhood was like and how you grew up, who your influences were, how you ended up where you are now. I am going to ask you about Wipe It Down.
Okay.
um, just so I can bring in a little bit of, how you bring together music and science education and all of that. And I want to make sure I touch upon the nonprofit profit Science Haven, talk about Black in science and numbers and percentages, and I'm interested in how we foster an ongoing interest in science and STEM, and that's just kind of overview of a couple different questions I was thinking about asking. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Anything you want me to make sure I include that I didn't mention yet?
No, that's pretty much all the things that I am really talking about these days. So
Okay. That sounds good. And then at the end, I will ask you what's your one big piece of advice for somebody who wants to follow in your footsteps, or women in male-dominated fields in general. And then we'll wrap up.
okay, sounds good.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to adjust everything, make sure and you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Sound is
Can you hear
good.
me?
Yeah, I can hear you well. And let me, if you'll check also, I'm gonna just make sure all my dings are off and just make sure things don't go off. All
Okay.
right. Okay. So we'll pause for a second. And and let me ask you, do you just want to be do you want me to introduce you as just Raven the Science Maven? Do you want me to use your whole name
You can
or
introduce
both?
me as yeah, I prefer both.
Okay.
Like I prefer Raven Baxter, but then you can say like also known
Also
as
known as. Okay.
yeah.
All right. Okay, we'll pause for a second and then we'll start. Well, I am so excited to have Raven Baxter on, also known as Raven the Science Maven, on with me today. Raven, it is so nice to have you here.
Hi Nancy, it's great to be here as well. Thanks for
So
having me.
go ahead. Oh, and off the record, I'm going to say if you want to repeat anything, it'll be edited out. If you just say, "Hold on, I'll start again," like this part, we'll edit out.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
they're
Oh,
two separate tracks, and so don't worry about if I accidentally interrupt you or vice versa.
okay. Good
Okay,
to
all
know.
right. Okay, so carry on.
Yeah, I was just saying thanks for having me. I'm really excited to speak with you and just get into the good stuff today.
Awesome. I always like to start with my guests by going way, way, way back and talking about childhood and influences and sort of the different pieces of how you were brought up that took you to where you are now.
I feel like I always had this natural inclination to investigating the world around me and asking questions, and that's really the nature of science itself, and being a scientist is asking questions and being curious about the world around you and using the tools and the resources that you have to answer those questions. And so when I was a kid, my questions were super simple. Like, hey, mom, why is the sky blue? And why is the grass green? And things like that. And she's not a scientist. She's very smart. Everybody in my family is very smart, but I'm the only scientist in my family, turns out. And so people didn't have answers for me. I had to figure it out myself. And I would go to the library and I check out books, and I was just doing everything I could as a kid. I had to be about like 7, 6 when all of this really started for me. And that grew as I got older and as I progressed in my academics. I just learned how to be a bigger and better scientist. And it's always been my number one priority over my other interests. And I'm still a scientist today, and I share it with other people now.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Buffalo, New York, which is right on the US Canada border. I am 6 hours from New York City and an hour and a half from Toronto, Canada.
So tell me a little bit about when you were growing up, whether that love and interest in just being inquisitive, was it supported? I mean, even if there was no one that was actually a scientist or nobody in STEM in your immediate family, do you feel like family supported you? Do you feel like the educators and the people around you supported you, or did you ever feel any resistance?
Um, I'm really fortunate to have had super positive experiences as a younger scientist. And by younger, I mean like before I became a professional, like my job title is I'm a scientist.
Hmm.
Um, I've and I also think that I was very fortunate in that I somehow was a child that really did not care what other people thought about what I was doing. I don't know how I became that way. I feel like there I didn't really have many examples of that, like people really breaking out of boxes and being happy with that growing up. My family, although they're super smart, they're also pretty traditional.
Hmm.
And so, although being a scientist wasn't something they would frown upon, like um, people around me kind of had this belief that, and people outside of my family, so I'm talking about my peers as a child and like my classmates and things like that, really didn't understand that it was okay to be smart, one, and like it's okay to be excited about things that you're learning about. So I would get teased by my classmates. I'd finish my tests and my quizzes early, and people would be throwing stuff at me, like because I'd be sitting there at my desk minding my own business, and everybody else would still be working, and I'd notice like spitballs, spitballs and things like that. But like I just thought that was a part of growing up. It wasn't until I was older did I realize, oh, they were picking on me because I was smart and I was really excited about doing work and things like that. And as far as like adults go, my family was very supportive of my interest in science. My mom um, helped me get to space camp, which was a very transformative experience for me. And then once I got to college, I majored in biology eventually, and my advisors and mentors were very supportive of me as well.
That's great. That's amazing. I mean, that makes such a big difference. But, to go back to what you were saying about being teased for being smart, I think that women in particular get get penalized at various stages for being too smart or too mouthy or too opinionated, or bossy, right? That's like one of those common words that's thrown around that has this negative connotation. And I think that we sometimes growing up sort of feel this pressure around us societally to kind of tone it down a little bit. Thankfully you did not, right? Because you're like, I don't care. But I think that a lot of girls and women kind of get that feeling and feel like they have to be like, oh, I don't want to show all my cards. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Um, so like basically my thoughts on women not really being able to be their unapologetic selves
Hmm.
in their spaces.
Yeah.
It's It's something that deeply impacted me for a long time. And it wasn't until these past, well, actually, I would say just a little over a year ago, did I realize my value and my worth as I am. And, you know, it up until that point, I had been enduring trauma because I was hiding a part of me that I valued and that should have been valued by other people in my space, but wasn't. And that was really depressing for me. And I didn't realize how deeply it impacted me until I made that decision to kind of wake up and become more self-aware and realize, what am I doing?
Mhm.
I only have one life to live, and
Mhm.
I'm living it by these standards of people that I don't really even know, like people who I'm not very important to, or they're not really that important to me. And, and I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not causing any harm. So why not just be me? And
Mhm.
once I got to that point, oh my gosh, it was like chains were broken. I was floating. It was just a really freeing sensation to truly feel free and like govern myself accordingly. It's amazing. And I want every woman to feel that type of freedom.
Mhm. Mhm. I think I went through a similar transformation as well where, you worry about what people think of what you're doing, not just in the journey to orthopedics, but even just kind of getting on social media and being a little bit more outspoken and being an advocate for women in medicine, women in STEM. And just I think it's hard to make that jump from that level where we're at that high achieving level, right? I'm sure you were at this very high achieving level, and then to make that leap to the genius level, right? And so when you kind of break through those chains and you're doing everything that you and your soul wants to do, it's like taking this jump into hyperspace, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. Like we unlock these superpowers. I thought that I was already, killing it. And I definitely don't say this to sound arrogant or conceited, but I really do
Yeah.
feel like once I mentally freed myself from these societal constructs, and decided to just be my unapologetic self, my decision making looked different. My
Mhm.
confidence was just sky high. I was able to move and operate in ways that I didn't even know was possible. And I take chances. I, pursue things that are challenging, and I do it all with a smile on my face, knowing that like this is about me. This isn't about what
Mhm.
people think I should be doing or like anything else. This is just what I want to do in life and I'm living my purpose. It feels amazing.
So, can you tell me about one of the instances where after you kind of realized you didn't have to be boxed in, what you dove into, maybe a project or something that you're working on, that was sort of your step into this space?
Oh, so yeah, like when I talked earlier about trauma, like I had endured some really tough situations as a professional, and to bridge between my childhood experiences and my life as a professional scientist, those two lived experiences were almost polar opposite, where I felt loved and supported and cared for as a young junior scientist. And then when I became more senior and I graduated and I had graduate degrees and I was working in a corporate position doing drug discovery and cancer research, completely different sensation. I did not feel loved. I did not feel cared for. I felt very neglected. And there were very like clear points in time where people clearly vocalized to me that I did not belong and said some very hurtful things. And I experienced that not only as a cancer researcher, but also as an academic. I worked as a community college professor for some time. And even in that position, I had people around me saying, "You don't belong here." And those those experiences cumulatively contributed to my complete turnaround as far as what I decided I wanted to do with my life and how I wanted to be. And that epiphany occurred, and man, like I started, I had to make a decision, really, like, what do I want to do? Do I want to continue giving into this? And it's really toxic, like giving into this toxicity of these expectations of what a scientist should look like, what they should walk like, talk like, act like, just all of those things, or should I let it go? And it was hard for me to let it go and continue to be in those spaces. So ultimately,
Mhm.
I left those spaces, and I wanted to pursue a career in education because I wanted to turn around and give back and bring in more people of color into STEM, but also while working towards healing STEM culture as a whole. Because the things that I experience, it's not going to be the first or last time it happens.
Mhm.
But if we work on it, and if we're really intentional about improving STEM culture, then we can actually have retention. Um, so I felt guilty for doing that at first because I said, people around me, although they were supportive, a lot of that support came from statistics of Black women in STEM. And they would, when I expressed my emotions and how sad I was, they're like, well, there's so few Black women in STEM, you can't leave. You can't leave because then you'll be another statistic. And I'm like, oh my God, I had to battle with this thought of like, do I stay so I can beat these numbers, or do I leave so that I can preserve my physical and emotional health? Like, what do I do?
Mhm.
Um, I ultimately left, and then I felt guilty for months, guilty,
Mhm.
because I felt like I failed. The reality was I didn't. I just needed some time to heal and reflect, and I did that. And so a few months later, after, I left out of that environment, I had a second epiphany, and I'm like, wait a second, like they really missed out. Like once you kind of get over those feelings of, oh my gosh, I did something wrong, I failed, and you realize that the problem wasn't you,
Mhm.
the problem was a toxic work culture.
Right.
You look back on it and you're like, oh my God, they really messed up. They lost some
Yeah.
real talent. And once I got to that point, I was like, okay, so there was nothing wrong with me, really. Like, I'm not perfect, but I know I wasn't doing anything wrong. Um, and I was still uncomfortable. So let me just embrace who I am and maintain that confidence in my unapologetic self. And also spread a message to other women who might be feeling the same ways that I felt, that maybe the reason why they're not feeling accepted is something that they're doing wrong, and reassure them that they can be their unapologetic selves in science and that it's okay. So I made a music video, and the music video basically was my like visual narrative of how free I wanted Black women to feel in STEM. And that
Mhm.
video is called Big Old Geeks. And it was really the first time I can say that I've ever seen Black women represented so freely as scientists, because it's a music video, and I'm it's the lyrics are entirely scientific and pretty technical, but it's also like a lyrical narrative of what my experience has been like as a Black woman in STEM,
Mhm.
but also messages of empowerment like threaded in there. The visuals are like completely embracing traditional rap culture, and like in a super unapologetic way. So we didn't skim anything off the top. We kept everything, the fast cars, the club wear, the dancing, club scenes, but then also there's lab scenes, me in my lab coat, me dancing in the lab, working with lab tools. And so I juxtapose those images purposefully because I kind of wanted to shock people into understanding that everybody is multidimensional. We all have these dualities that we kind of have to exist
Mhm.
in the workplace. We come into work as one person, we go home and most of us are a different person. And that's for different reasons. But for Black women, it's very extreme. And so I wanted to make a case where people can see that not only am I doing that, but I'm enjoying being all of those things at the same time, and that we can
Mhm.
do all of these things at the same time. We can be our unapologetic selves and talk about science the way we want to and exist in these fields as we are. And it was it made me really nervous doing that because I'd never seen it done before.
Right.
But the support from me putting that out was really incredible.
And that's very validating, you know? I think after having gone through the trauma of thinking about leaving your field and having the guilt and then finding yourself again, I think to have that support is very validating. And you know, and uh, all the things that you're talking about, this is one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on, because I think that sometimes as a woman in STEM and a woman of color in STEM, it's you can enter into a toxic culture in which it's almost like this culture is gaslighting you, right? And
Yeah.
telling you these untruths, and then you wonder, am I crazy? You know, is there something wrong with me? So you kind of went through that process of realizing that I'm not crazy, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with me. And then you just blossomed. And so I think that's amazing. Now, I also it also made me think about how that video brings together all the different parts of you. And sometimes, and especially if, you know, if a woman is in a profession where they're not well represented, and the Black woman is in a profession where they're not well represented, then the individuals within their personal lives, their personal circle, who are maybe outside of that field, can almost give an impression of like, oh, well, you know, you're not being true to our culture, and you're
Mhm.
not being true to you're almost it's almost like there's this sense of traitorism because you're going off and you're being the scientist. I mean, what do you think? Do you think that I've talked to other women who have expressed that, and they kind of just have to stay strong and be like, this is who I am. This is what I'm interested in. I'm not being a traitor to my ethnicity, to my culture by chasing these dreams. What do you think about that?
That's really interesting. So it's super complex, right? Like I
Yeah,
feel like there's three parts to this, and
right.
maybe even four. Like the the one part is like there will be people who understand that there is a gap in representation in
Mhm.
STEM and how important it is for Black women to get into these fields and hopefully be able to stay in these fields, should the work culture be supportive of their
Mhm.
presence, right? And then there are people who um like don't have a connection with science or have a negative connection with science due to the history of mistreatment
Mhm.
of people of color by scientists and by healthcare professionals. Like
Yeah,
there is a huge mistrust in communities of color because of this, especially the Black community.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
you hear like people when people might hear that you're going into science and being a scientist, then it becomes you're working for them.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
you
you're
just
becoming one of them.
exactly.
Yeah.
And like they might still love you, but they definitely like won't see you the same. You know, there's no talking out of it's hard to talk yourself out of that type of mistrust, you know, because it's very
Right.
deep. It really has nothing to do with you. It
Yep.
has to do with their mistrust of the systems that have been in place.
Right.
So there's that. And I think maybe I could narrow down my 4 ideas to those two, I think. Like, but those aren't the only two varieties of
Mhm.
responses that I've gotten. Like, and maybe the
Right.
third one would be like people who don't necessarily mistrust science, but view science as a predominantly white field, which it is in America at least. And
Mhm.
then they see, you know, oh, you know, you work with them and you're uppity now, or
Mhm.
you're, you know, you're whitewashed now because you work with all the white people. And like, I've also gotten that too. And so like in conversations in passing, somebody might joke around and say, oh, you working up there with the white folks, you know, or something like that. And people think it's funny, and I'm like, I'm a scientist too, you know. I'm not just
Mhm.
up there with the white folks. I'm working with them, and we are all doing our jobs.
Mhm.
Um, Now it doesn't feel that way sometimes, but that's a reality. Yeah, so like I totally can relate to that experience.
So I want to change gears a little bit and go back to when you discovered that you could marry music and education and entertainment and science. What was your inspiration to bring these together? I know you talked a little bit about your first video, but how did you get that idea?
Um, well, I've always loved music. I've played around with music probably at the same age, really, that I was starting my scientific interest at around 6 or 7. I was playing piano, I was playing guitar, and we had a computer, and we had like little programs on the computer where you could make sounds and stuff. So I was into that. But at that point, it never occurred to me to mix the two. I started doing rap music as opposed to classical music once I got to high school, and I started listening to more rap music then, and I became a huge rap fan. But I like a lot of different genres. Um, and I was also a huge science fan at that time. But even
Mhm.
at that point in time, I didn't really understand that I could mix the two. And it wasn't until like after I started my professional career as a scientist did I really understand that all of these things that I'm interested in and all these parts of who I am can be interconnected in some way. And only then did I explore that I could make science rap music.
It's like this light bulb turning on, right? I'm sure you lived many, many years having these separate spheres in your life. It's like here's Science Raven and here's Rap Raven, and it's like they live in different places. And so when you said, "Hey, I can bring these together," I'm sure it was like this huge epiphany, right?
It was like, you know, when I wrote one of my first science rap songs, Big Ol' Geeks, I did not start writing that song scientifically. It had just started naturally coming out when I was writing in my notebook. I'm like, are these science words? This is kind of weird. Should I be rapping about science? And then I'm like, well, why not? Why not? I can still express how I'm feeling, but use metaphors and similes for things that I'm familiar with as a scientist in my everyday life to express how I'm feeling and what messages I want to convey. And it was really interesting connecting those two pieces because it really allowed me to get even more creative, right? Like the possibilities were endless. It seemed like, oh, it's like I can talk about gel electrophoresis in a like, okay,
I
let's do
love it.
it.
I love it. Well, then let me ask you this. What do these words mean to you? Wipe it down.
Yeah. Life is down is like life changing. Oh my gosh. Yes, Wipe It Down. That's a song I made earlier this year, and oh man, I wrote that song really in the blink of an eye. Honestly, it took me 20 minutes to write that song. And I recorded it. It took me like an hour to record it. And it took me like 30 minutes to make that music video. And um, it was meant to educate people about the new coronavirus that
Mhm.
had just appeared months before March. And I knew in January that this was going to be a major issue in the United States. I just knew it was going
Yeah.
to be a huge problem. I felt like very few other people realized that, but I knew I nothing that's happened this year has surprised me. Um,
Mhm.
and I was getting ready for that. I was tracking the virus. At the time, I was working in a high school, and in early January, I put out two bulletin boards, gigantic bulletin boards, and one bulletin board was a world map, and one
Mhm.
other bulletin board was the U.S. map. And the minute that we saw the virus pop up in China, in Wuhan, I said, okay, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna trap this virus. And they're like, why would we do that? I'm like, just watch.
Mhm.
And and I mean, week by week, they're like, wow, Miss Baxter, I can't believe it. It's spreading. It's in Italy now. I'm like, yeah, it's in Italy now. I'm like, do you think it's gonna come here? They're like, no. I'm like, okay, let's keep going. Let's keep
Yeah.
going. And time would pass. And um, by the time March rolled around, I was just ready to get the word out about how people should protect themselves. I live in New York State again, so we were one of the first places hit here, and we got locked down in March, and
Mhm.
it was crazy here. I mean, the grocery
Yeah.
stores ransacked, gas stations going crazy. Um, People were just losing it, unsure of what's going on, really panicking. And my knee-jerk reaction was, I have to help. I have to do
Mhm.
something. What can
Mhm.
I do? I'm not working at the CDC. I can't I wanted to be like, put me in, coach, throw me at the bench. But I'll do something. I'll do anything. I'll centrifuge. Like, what do you want me to do? I'll autoclave. I'll do anything. And I
Yeah.
realized all I had was my voice. Like, that's all I had. And instead of preaching, people are getting so much information thrown at them at this point in time. Like, I don't even think at that point we definitely did not have any type of mask ordinance happening because it was so new.
Right.
And that's why I didn't talk about mask in the song, by the way, which
Mhm.
I certainly
Mhm.
would have if we had known about how efficient those were, or
Mhm.
effective rather. Um, but we, I wanted to put something out there, and so I wanted to do it in a way that was unapologetically me, and also was very informative. And I remixed a song that was popular about 10 years ago called Wipe Me Down. And that song is about going to the club and like a dude that's got girls all over him, and like he's the bomb, a bag of chips and all of that. And I'm going to remix that song to talk about science and the coronavirus, and like how to practice personal hygiene and best practices for preventing the spread of the disease. And I put it up on Facebook privately as a joke. Um, my family and friends jumped on it immediately, and I'm like, guys, I don't think this is that good. Um, are you guys serious? They're like, no, Raven, it's actually really good. I'm like, I think this is kind of embarrassing. Like, I don't think that I should put this out. That's why I have it private on here for you guys. And they said, no, no, you need to put this everywhere. And so I did. I was really nervous about it because I really thought it was a terrible video.
But at the
But
same time, this is you, right? Like, this is you and your purest you.
exactly. So, I mean, I didn't know what was gonna happen. I was just doing it on the guidance of like, hey, my family friends like it, and we're all locked in the house right now, kind of scared for our lives. So here goes nothing, and it went super crazy viral. which was mortifying. At first, I'm like, I thought people in Hawaii, like, but they just saw me on TV, and I said,
That's
"Oh."
amazing.
But it's really a blessing in disguise because turns out like I had much more to say down the line about life, and people really enjoy listening to my voice and everything else that I have to bring to the table. So I'm very glad that that video went viral, because now I have the opportunity to form so many bonds and connections around the world that I
Mhm.
probably wouldn't have had if I did not put that video out. So I'm super grateful.
And you know, you have really done so much in that multimedia space. Tell me a little bit about Science Haven.
Yeah, Science Haven is a budding nonprofit organization that really has a mission of normalizing the education of scientists towards education, right?
Mhm.
And creating education centered scientists. And this is an initiative that I've started because I recognize that even our top science institutions do not include mandatory science communication coursework in their course requirements for their undergraduates, at least in many graduate programs, nor do they um, require any type of education courses in that course requirement framework. For many institutions, Harvard is the number one um, science institution in America, as according to the U.S. News ranking report. But they have a science communication course, and even in the course description, they say scientists who are trained in science communication are better colleagues, right? They're better scientists, they're better communicators.
Mhm.
And that's why this course is important, but they don't require it. It's an elective. And we have this gigantic gap in America. I mean, just a huge gap. And it's there for many reasons. But we have a gap between science and the public that has only widened, I feel, in this past year.
Mhm.
And that's a very dangerous thing when
Mhm.
we have large, widespread public mistrust of science.
Right.
Uh, and then on top of that, barely any scientists who have been trained in communication and education to inform the public about the
Mhm.
science that they need to know. So
Mhm.
Science Haven is holding higher education institutions accountable for being initiators of this change and creating scientists that are ready to be connected with the public and really embrace this shift in how we view science culture, from one that where rigor is determined by, time at the lab bench, or, research X, Y, and Z in the hard sciences. We should also shift a little bit. I'm not asking for us to all just throw ourselves into the education hat, but we really should allow spaces for scientists who desire to study and conduct education and communication related activities in their professional career, normalize that at the undergraduate level so that we can build up from there and create these pathways to have more scientists in our communities.
Right, and I agree. I mean, this year more than ever, we're seeing a need for that, for good science communication and education, because there's this very concerning trend of science becoming an optional thing to believe in, you know, and so it's never been as important as it is now. And another project that you are involved with is Black in Science Communication, and so tell me a little bit about that as well.
Black in Science Communication, also known as Black in SciComm, is a passion project of mine that started in the idea started in May, and it started from this sensation that my voice as a scientist was really being strained by my need really to fight for world peace and racial justice and social justice and all of these things. They were stressing my voice as a scientist out
Mhm.
because I although it is in my best interest to advocate for those things. I wasn't born a social justice warrior, you know what I'm saying? Like, I've never sat up and asked of the world, hey, I want to grow up and fight for my life, so that I can live a regular, stress-free situation where I don't have to worry about being judged by my skin color,
Mhm.
And but I came to learn growing up that these are just things that I have to do because of the nature of our society, unfortunately, and it shouldn't be that way, but it is.
Mhm.
And so when May came and the protests around George Floyd's murder happened, I was very vocal about how I felt, and I was very stressed out. And also around the Breonna Taylor murder. Breonna Taylor and I are literally 7 days, I think, apart in age. Born the same year, just about a week apart. She is me. Hey, like,
Mhm.
we are each other. That very well could have been me sleeping in
Yeah.
bed. You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying? Like, and that was deeply impactful for me. So, but in during that time from May all the way up until August, I had barely talked about any science, right? I came out with Wipe It Down, I think in March, and I was
Mhm.
doing some science content. I released a music album actually in May, full of science songs. It was really a project. Not really an album, but I released a music album in May that had science songs on it. And but then the end of May happened, and then May through August, I really could do nothing but worry for myself.
Mhm.
And I didn't have the chance to talk about science because I was so weighed down by what was happening in society. And I
Right.
recognized that was happening for other Black science communicators. And
Mhm.
science communicators are people who are sharing their joy for science with the world and communicating either their research or just scientific concepts in general to the general public. And for us to not be able to do that during a pandemic um, is really bad.
Right.
Um, and so I founded Black in Science Communication because I wanted to bring a retreat and a retreat that was packed with resources and workshops and skill building opportunities to the Black community, and doing that in the hopes that we're bringing some relief and restoring confidence and a sense of importance to the voices of Black people in the science community so that we can get back up and continue talking about what we're passionate about and be reminded that we are valued, our lives do matter, and we do deserve rest to get back to what we're really passionate about, and that is science.
Right. So then, on that note, what will Raven the Science Maven be doing in 5 to 10 years? You're clearly doing some really important work right now. What does 5 or 10 years look like?
So I would like to become.
Put it all out there.
I just put it all out there. I've already put this out there, so let's just do that. A few days ago, I decided that I was going to be so bold. Apparently, this was bold. When I did it, I didn't realize how bold it was, but I guess I really, I really did something. But I put a tweet out there, and I just explained to people, "Hey, I'm finishing my doctorate next semester. This is what I've done. I've got a bachelor's and master's degree in biology. I've worked as a corporate molecular scientist, and I've been a K-12 teacher and administrator, and I've taught at university, and I've been an academic advisor at a university, and like, I'm wondering what's next for me." And then I put like a dot, 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 and I said, I want Betsy Davos's job. Betsy
I
Davos,
love
I know.
it.
She is the United States Secretary of Education, hopefully only for like 3 more months. But I want her job because I really want to transform the US state of education.
Yep.
And although our schooling is often determined by local government organizations. I feel like there are many nationwide initiatives that I could implement to help get us on a better track. We have so much talent. Gosh, like I've been in the public schools, we have so much talent there, but the systems and the structures that we need to support that talent are just not there. And we need to take a really good look at not only what our students need, but what our educators need so that we can really holistically look at our school systems and what we need to do to progress. I'm really passionate about that. So that's one thing. And I don't know if that'll happen in the next 5 to 10 years, but like,
I
you know,
hope to see you there. I'm going to be rooting for you.
thank you. And then, I mean, other than that, like I'm starting my like television career next year, which is really fun.
Woo!
Oh, I can't say too much about that, but I'm so excited. Like I can barely contain my excitement for that. So you'll hear more about that soon. And I would like to write some children's books. I'm I want to have a leadership position. If I'm not immediately the Secretary of Education, I'm I'm hoping for at least a bridge to that position. You know, I'll be
Yeah.
definitely working hard in these next few years to continue establishing my voice and gaining leadership experience. I might dive into politics. It's looking more and more like I'm going to be doing that, especially after this year. I'm realizing where my strengths might be most valuable. Um,
Mhm.
and so yeah, like that's all I got. Maybe big, and, you know, just being my unapologetic self.
You're definitely a Renaissance woman. I think a lot of the women that I talk to on this podcast are. So, if you had one big piece of advice for somebody who wants to follow in your footsteps, what would that be?
Oh man. You know, I do give this same advice to people, and I want to try to think of something different, but I feel like all of my
Hey, if
best,
it's good advice,
I
it's good
know.
advice.
Well, it is good advice, and I feel like it definitely sums up how I feel about most things. And I guess I could say, you know, in addition to being your unapologetic self at all times, also being your number one fan, being your own cheerleader is so important because it's so easy to get discouraged on your journey to understanding what it means to be your unapologetic self. You could try to kind of break out of the box here, and you might get shut down by somebody who's not used to seeing you in that way, or by somebody who has biases against whatever you're trying to do or how you're trying to portray yourself. And that's tough. I'm definitely not saying that being your unapologetic self is easy. It's a process, it's a learned thing, but once you get there, gosh, like it feels like you've crossed underneath a rainbow or something, like to the other side. It's amazing, and the journey's a little tough. So don't get too down on yourself if you're feeling like you're trying to push yourself to be your unapologetic self and it feels weird, and you know, you might think that you're making other people uncomfortable, you know, you might feel like it's not the right thing to do. Just keep following your heart, listen to what's right for you, and you will be okay. Keep cheering yourself on and being your number one fan.
I love that. And on that note, I think that sometimes the most difficult path is the one that helps us grow the most.
Wow, yeah,
Yeah.
that's so right.
Yeah. Well, I would love for the listeners to be able to find you online. You're all over online. Tell us where they can find you.
Yay! I'm so excited for you to join my community online. It is a joy to me to be able to connect with people from all around the world. So I'd be so happy if you could follow me at Raven the Science Maven on Instagram and Facebook, or if you're on Twitter, I'm on there probably the most. I'm at Raven Sci Maven, RAVEN SCIMAVEN. And then my website is www.sciencemaven.com. And I'm also on TikTok at Science Maven, and I have a YouTube channel. You can just search for Raven the Science Maven there. See you soon.
Thanks so much for being on. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you, Nancy. This was awesome.
All right, that's a wrap. I'm going to go ahead and stop